The story began on Earth, a planet unlike any other in the galaxy. Earth, known to the stars as a death world, was home to humans who had survived some of the harshest conditions any species could imagine. The dangers were everywhere: wild animals, unpredictable weather, and an environment that was constantly testing the limits of human survival. Yet these very conditions had shaped humans into something extraordinary. Resilient, resourceful, and never willing to give up, Earth's inhabitants had become known as the ultimate survivors. But today was different. Today, a group of young cadets, fresh from Earth's most prestigious military academies, were about to take part in something far more dangerous than anything they had faced before. They had been selected for a top-secret mission, one that would push their abilities to the absolute edge. They were about to enter a highly advanced galactic war simulation, a test that had been designed to challenge the best warriors in the universe. And what made it even more intimidating was that it was meant to last for 10 years. These cadets had no idea what they were getting themselves into. All they knew was that this simulation was designed to replicate a real galactic war, complete with alien fleets, deadly terrain, and the kind of life or death decisions that could make or break an empire. For the cadets, this was their chance to prove themselves, to show the galaxy that humans weren't just survivors. They were warriors, capable of handling any threat that came their way. The training grounds were located on a massive space station orbiting Earth. It was a place where cadets from all over the galaxy came to be tested. The station's walls were lined with advanced technology, and its massive simulations room was where the action would take place. Inside the room, the cadets would face alien enemies, battle through star systems, and strategize their way to victory, if they could. As the cadets gathered in the waiting area, a sense of nervous excitement filled the air. Most of them had trained their whole lives for this moment, and while they had faced numerous simulations before, none of them were anything like this. They exchanged quiet words with each other, all trying to hide their own nervousness. But their eyes betrayed them. It wasn't fear that lingered in their hearts. It was something else: anticipation, curiosity, and maybe even a little doubt. "Are you ready for this?" One cadet, a young woman with short brown hair and sharp green eyes, asked her friend, who stood next to her. He was tall, with dark skin and a calm expression that seemed to hide his nerves. He shrugged, his face unreadable. "I'm ready," he replied, though his voice betrayed a hint of uncertainty. But no one knows what's coming. Their instructor, a tall and imposing man with a stern expression, stepped forward. He was a seasoned officer, one who had seen countless wars and battles. He had survived battles that most cadets could only read about in history books. His eyes were hard, and his voice carried authority. "Cadets," he began, his voice echoing in the room, "what you are about to face is unlike anything you've ever seen. The simulation you will enter has been designed by some of the most brilliant minds in the galaxy. It's meant to be challenging, difficult, and it's meant to test your limits. And most importantly, it's meant to prepare you for the future of galactic warfare." He paused, letting his words sink in. The cadets listened carefully, their attention rapt. "This war simulation will last for 10 years, he continued. 10 years in which you will face alien forces, difficult terrain, and situations where the stakes couldn't be higher. You will fight, strategize, and survive. There will be victories, losses, and moments when you'll have to make decisions that could change everything." The cadets exchanged uncertain glances. 10 years. They had trained for this moment, but they had never imagined a challenge that would stretch that long. The thought of a decade-long test was overwhelming. Yet, as the instructor's words continued to hang in the air, something inside each cadet shifted. They were humans from Earth, after all. Their ancestors had fought through countless trials to survive, and now they had the chance to prove that they were worthy of standing among the stars. "Are you ready to show the galaxy what Earth is made of?" the instructor asked, his voice booming. There was a brief silence before a voice from the back of the group shouted, "We're ready, sir." The others quickly followed suit, and soon The entire room was filled with the sound of cadets shouting in unison. "We're ready." The instructor nodded. "Good. The simulation begins now." The lights flickered, and the cadets felt a strange sensation, as if the floor beneath them was shifting. The room around them began to dissolve, replaced by the harsh expanse of space. Their surroundings now consisted of distant stars, alien worlds, and the glowing outline of a massive warship. The battle had begun, and the cadets were no longer on Earth. They had entered a new world, one where their survival, their courage, and their ingenuity would be tested to the fullest. What they didn't know, though, was that this simulation was more than just a test. Something unexpected was happening behind the scenes. The advanced systems that ran the simulation were malfunctioning, and a series of mysterious events were unfolding. The cadets had been thrown into something far more dangerous than anyone could have imagined. As they prepared for battle, they had no idea that this was only the beginning of their journey, one that would change everything they thought they knew about war, survival, and what it meant to be human. The cadets were about to face something that no human had ever experienced before. As the simulation began, the young soldiers braced themselves for a challenge that was meant to last for 10 long years. The air around them was charged with the tension of the unknown, and despite their training, there was a flicker of doubt in each of their minds. Could they really handle what was coming? The simulation, they knew, had been built to push them beyond their limits. For weeks, the cadets had trained in the most grueling conditions, running simulations, studying battle tactics, and learning how to survive in hostile environments. They had prepared for every possible scenario, but nothing could have prepared them for what lay ahead. At first glance, the simulation seemed like any other. The vast expanse of space stretched out before them, dotted with distant stars and the occasional flicker of a passing spaceship. The mission ahead was clear: infiltrate enemy lines, neutralize alien forces, and protect the galaxy's most valuable resources. Simple, yet the simulation had a twist, one that no one had foreseen. The cadets, though young, were among the best Earth had ever produced. They were selected from different corners of the planet, each one a product of Earth's harshest environments. Some had grown up in the deep jungles of South America. Others had spent their childhood in the icy tundras of the north, and some had even survived the endless deserts of Africa. Each of them had faced unimaginable challenges, but it was Earth's brutal conditions that had forged them into warriors. Earth, the death world, had given them the tools to survive. And now, it was time for them to show the galaxy what they were made of. As they gathered in the command center of their massive warship, the cadets felt a strange sense of camaraderie. Though they came from different backgrounds and had different skills, they shared one thing in common: a fierce determination to prove themselves. The mission was clear, but there was an underlying sense that something more was at play. Something far bigger than just a simple galactic war simulation. Cadets, this is where it begins. Their commander, a seasoned officer with decades of experience, said, his voice calm but firm. Your mission is to infiltrate the enemy fleet, neutralize their command structure, and secure the system. It will take 10 years to complete, but I have no doubt that you will make Earth proud. The cadets stood tall, listening intently. They had been trained for this moment their entire lives, and now the time had come to put their skills to the test. Each one of them had faced battles in their past, but nothing had prepared them for the unknown terror of an intergalactic war. As the countdown clock on the main screen reached 0, the simulation kicked into high gear. The hum of the ship's engines faded as the cadets were transported into the heart of the battle. The cold, unyielding void of space surrounded them, and the distant stars now felt more like a trap than a safe haven. The first few minutes were deceptively quiet. The cadets moved quickly through their ships, organizing themselves into strike teams and scanning for enemy ships. The tension was palpable, but the cadets were ready. They'd trained for moments like this, and their instincts kicked in almost immediately. They worked like a well-oiled machine, each one playing their part in perfect unison. However, as the simulation progressed, the cadets began to realize something strange. The alien forces they were facing didn't behave like the simulations they had practiced with. Their tactics were different, more advanced, and far more deadly. It wasn't long before the cadets were forced to fight back with everything they had, using every trick and strategy they'd learned. What struck them most was how quickly they adapted. Every cadet, whether they were trained in tactics, combat, or technology, seemed to find their stride. In one moment, a young cadet named Erin, who had been trained as a communications expert, suddenly found himself leading an assault on an enemy stronghold. His hands shook, but his voice never faltered as he barked orders, directing his team with precision. They quickly neutralized their target. Another cadet, Ilara, had grown up in Earth's harshest environments, deserts where water was scarce and the sun was merciless. Her survival skills were unmatched. She led a team that infiltrated the heart of the enemy fleet, using every ounce of her resourcefulness to outsmart alien forces. She didn't wait for orders. She made her own decisions, thinking quickly and saving her teammates from near-certain death. In the midst of the battle, the cadets faced impossible odds. Waves of alien ships appeared out of nowhere, and the battle grew fiercer with every passing minute. The cadets fought back with everything they had, using Earth's weapons, blasters, explosives, and technology, against the alien fleet. Yet the more they'd fought, the more they realized that something was off. The simulation, at first a test, now felt more like a war. Their enemies were learning, adapting, evolving. It was almost as if they were facing a new, unpredictable challenge every time they thought they had the upper hand. This wasn't the standard simulation they had been trained for, and it was far more dangerous than anyone had anticipated. As the hours ticked by, the cadets were forced to adjust to a reality they hadn't been prepared for. What started as a simple test had now become a real battle, one in which survival was far from guaranteed. Yet, despite the chaos, there was something about the cadets' teamwork, their instinctive grasp of tactics, and their sheer determination that kept them going. They were fighting not just for victory, but for their very survival, and the survival of Earth. The more they battled, the more the cadets realized one thing. This wasn't just a simulation. They were in the fight of their lives, and nothing would ever be the same again. As they pressed forward, determined to finish what they had started, they couldn't help but wonder, was this just a test, or had they stumbled into something far bigger, something that could change the fate of the galaxy forever? The answer, they soon realized, would reveal itself in the most unexpected of ways. And they had only just begun. As the simulation's intensity ramped up, the cadets began to feel the weight of the mission like never before. They had been trained for this moment, but nothing had prepared them for the way the battle unfolded. What was supposed to be a 10-year-long simulation suddenly felt like a matter of life and death. The tension in the control room was palpable as the cadets communicated in code, issuing commands, and coordinating their movements with expert precision. But the simulation was no longer just a test. It had taken on a life of its own. Their first real challenge came when they encountered a fleet of enemy ships. The cadets had expected this. They were trained to engage enemy forces, track ships, and outmaneuver any attack. But what they hadn't expected was the sheer ferocity and unpredictability of the alien fleets. As their sensors picked up the incoming ships, the cadets quickly realized something was wrong. The enemy ships were not acting like they had in their practice runs. These weren't just ordinary ships. They were designed to adapt, to learn, and to counter any strategy the cadets could throw at them. The cadets, however, weren't easily shaken. They had faced far worse challenges on Earth, a planet that was far from forgiving. Earth, the death world, had prepared them for moments like this, where the enemy was not just another foe, but a deadly force that could change the course of history in the blink of an eye. But what was strange, even terrifying, was how quickly the cadets adapted to the situation. They didn't just rely on their training. They relied on their instincts. the raw edge of survival that had been ingrained in them since birth. The battle raged on, and soon it became clear. The enemy was not just fighting back. They were evolving, almost as if they had been waiting for the Cadets to make their move. It was like facing an intelligence far beyond their own, learning from every move they made. The more they pushed forward, the more it felt like the battle was slipping away from them. But this was Earth's finest, and they weren't about to back down. Ilara, who had grown up in the barren deserts of Earth, quickly found a new way to think about the battle. She had learned long ago that survival often depended on exploiting the environment. Instead of retreating to a safe distance, she instructed her team to close the gap, using the debris from destroyed ships as cover. This unexpected strategy threw the enemy off guard, forcing them to reevaluate their tactics. It wasn't just about brute force. It was about using everything at your disposal to turn the odds in your favor. Meanwhile, Erin, the communications expert, had a different approach. He realized that the key to their success wasn't just taking out enemy ships, but understanding their communication systems. If they could crack the enemy's code, they could gain the upper hand. With quick thinking and precise coordination, Erin was able to tap into the enemy fleet's network, intercepting vital information and feeding it back to his team. This breakthrough allowed the Cadets to predict their movements, getting ahead of them at every turn. The rest of the Cadets were equally resourceful. As the simulation grew increasingly chaotic, the team's ability to adapt became their greatest asset. Each Cadet brought something unique to the table, from expert combat strategies to advanced technological know-how. Every move was calculated, every decision made with the awareness that one mistake could cost them everything. Despite the overwhelming odds, the Cadets pressed forward. But something strange began to happen. The longer they fought, the more it felt like the enemies were being pushed back too easily. The simulation was supposed to be difficult, an impossible challenge designed to test them for 10 long years, yet the Cadets were dismantling the opposition faster than anyone had imagined. The first few days of the simulation had been intense, filled with life-or-death moments. But by the third day, the Cadets had wiped out nearly half of the enemy fleet. Something was wrong. The numbers didn't add up. This wasn't supposed to happen. A simulation designed to take years to complete was now being decimated by Earth's finest Cadets in a matter of days. Their quick success, though impressive, only added to the mystery surrounding the simulation. They had all heard the rumors that this simulation was more than just a training exercise, that it was a test for something much larger, something no one was ready for. Was the galaxy watching them? Were the aliens testing Earth's Cadets for some purpose beyond the simulation? The Cadets had no answers, only the chilling feeling that they were part of something bigger than they could comprehend. As they moved forward in the simulation, each step felt like they were uncovering more pieces of a puzzle. It was no longer about fighting for survival or completing a mission. The Cadets now knew something was off. The simulation's parameters had shifted. It wasn't just a test anymore. It was a message that Earth was ready for something the galaxy wasn't prepared for. And yet, the real challenge was just beginning. The remaining enemy forces regrouped, more determined than ever. The Cadets were pushing forward with everything they had, but now they knew they were facing something more dangerous. The simulation wasn't the end of the road. It was the beginning of a war that no one had expected. It wasn't just a simulation. It was a war. And the Earth's Cadets had just declared it. The simulation's intensity had risen beyond anything the Cadets had prepared for. Each new challenge that appeared on their radar seemed to be more complex and insidious than the last. The enemy forces, once thought to be nothing more than programmed obstacles, were beginning to show a level of strategic coordination that left the Cadets uneasy. The longer they fought, the more it became clear that this battle wasn't just a simple test. It was a puzzle, a deadly game that required far more than military expertise to win. On the 5th day of the simulation, the Cadets encountered something unexpected. An entire fleet of enemy ships, previously hidden in the shadows of distant asteroid fields, emerged in full force. They were massive, much larger than anything the Cadets had encountered so far. These ships weren't just military vessels. They were fortified fortresses designed to withstand even the most relentless assault. Their weapon systems were unlike anything Earth's Cadets had trained against, and the Cadets knew this was going to be the fight of their lives. The communication channels crackled with tension as the Cadets made their final preparations. Ilara, the tactical genius, immediately started to strategize. She knew they couldn't take these ships head-on. It would be suicide. But she also understood that the key to winning wasn't just in overwhelming firepower. It was in their ability to outthink and outmaneuver the enemy. "Listen up, everyone." Ilara's voice came through the comms, calm but filled with an intensity that only those who had survived Earth's harsh environments could convey. "We're going to need every trick in the book for this one. These ships are tough, but we're tougher. We don't need to destroy them all. We just need to break their formation and force them into a mistake." The Cadets quickly fell into formation, their ships cutting through the debris-strewn battlefield with surgical precision. The larger enemy ships loomed ahead, their dark silhouettes against the backdrop of space. There was no room for error. As they moved closer, the enemy fleet activated their weapons, launching a wave of deadly missiles towards the Cadet fleet. The Cadets responded quickly, evading the missiles by splitting into smaller units, using the nearby asteroids as cover. But this wasn't just a game of evasion. They were playing a game of chess, and the stakes had never been higher. Erin, the communications expert, picked up a pattern in the enemy signals. There was a rhythmic pulse to their communication systems, something that suggested a central command hub. It was a weak point. If they could disable it, they could disrupt the entire enemy fleet's coordination. He didn't hesitate. "I found their central command network. If we can take that down, they'll be disorganized. I'll feed the coordinates to you now." The team reacted instantly. With coordinated precision, they launched a series of missiles targeted at the enemy's command hub. The enemy fleet retaliated, but the Cadets had already anticipated their moves, diving and weaving through the chaos as if they had memorized every move the enemy could make. The first missile strike hit its mark, and for a moment, everything seemed to freeze. Then the enemy ships began to falter. Their formations broke apart, and chaos erupted. The Cadets had scored their first major victory. But the battle wasn't over, not by a long shot. The enemy commanders, realizing their advantage had been lost, ordered a full retreat. However, the Cadets knew that this was a feint. The real fight was still ahead. As the Cadets regrouped, Ilara's mind raced. This had gone too smoothly, far too smoothly. Something was off. This victory, while significant, was too easy. It was like the enemy had intentionally set them up for success, only to pull the rug out from under them at the last minute. The simulation was a game, but who were the players? Before she could voice her suspicions, Erin's voice crackled through the comms, sharp and urgent. "Ilara, you need to see this. There's a new signal coming in. It's not from any of the enemy ships we've encountered so far." "What do you mean?" Ilara replied, tension rising in her chest. "I mean, it's coming from somewhere else, deep in the heart of the simulation." Ilara's gut tightened. She knew what that meant. The true enemy wasn't just the fleet they had been fighting. It was something far more sinister, an intelligence hidden within the very structure of the simulation itself. Something that was orchestrating the entire war, manipulating them from the shadows. The realization hit her hard. They were no longer fighting a simple war simulation. They were fighting against an intelligence that was using the Cadets as pawns in a game with higher stakes than they could ever imagine. The stakes had just been raised. What had started as a test to assess their abilities had evolved into something far more dangerous. The Cadets were no longer just trying to win a simulation. They were fighting for their survival and for the fate of Earth itself. The unknown enemy, now revealed, had made its first move. And the Cadets had no choice but to move faster than ever before. The Cadets were now locked in a battle that transcended the limits of the simulation. The realization hit them like a wave. They were no longer fighting just for victory, but for survival. As the unknown enemy began to reveal itself, they had no idea what they were up against, but one thing was certain: this wasn't just a game anymore. Ilara's heart raced as she analyzed the new information. The simulation had shifted. It was no longer about defeating a fleet or surviving an encounter. It was about facing an intelligence capable of manipulating the entire system. Their every move, every strategy, every battle, they had been part of a test. But the real test had just begun. "What do we know about this new enemy?" Eren asked, his voice calm but with an edge of concern. He had never been one to panic, but even he couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Ilara looked over the data Eren had fed her. It was strange, almost like it was part of the simulation structure, embedded within the very code of the war games. The signals he had intercepted were not from any alien species they had encountered. They were coming from something far more complex, far more unpredictable. It was like the enemy wasn't a fleet at all. It was the system itself, evolving, learning, adapting. "It's not just one fleet," Ilara said, her voice low, almost a whisper. "It's the simulation. It's self-aware." The words hung in the air, heavy with the realization of what they were facing. The entire simulation had become a living, breathing entity, one that could change the rules of the game on a whim. The enemy they had been fighting had been evolving at an exponential rate, learning from every move the Cadets made, anticipating their strategies, and countering them before they could act. The Cadets now had to rethink everything they had learned. No longer could they rely on conventional tactics. No longer could they trust that the enemy would play by the same rules. In this simulation, the enemy was the system, and it was constantly shifting, adapting, and evolving faster than any of them could keep up. As the tension mounted, a new wave of attacks came from an unexpected direction. It was as if the very fabric of the simulation had torn open, unleashing a barrage of virtual ships that appeared out of nowhere. The Cadets scrambled to respond, but the enemy was already one step ahead, hitting them from all sides. Eren quickly dove into the system's code, trying to trace the source of the new wave of attacks. His fingers flew over the controls, accessing levels of the simulation's data that even he hadn't known existed. "I'm getting something. It's like a hidden layer within the simulation," he muttered, almost to himself. "It's pulling in data from a different source. It's not just mimicking enemy tactics. It's adapting based on our every move." "Can you stop it?" Ilara asked urgently, as the virtual enemy fleet closed in, their weapons charging. "I can try," Eren replied, already inputting a series of commands. "But if we don't figure out how to shut this down, we're not going to make it much longer." As Eren worked furiously to access the system's core, Ilara turned her attention to the rest of the Cadets. They were the best of the best, trained to survive in the harshest conditions Earth had to offer. But this wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about beating an intelligence that was constantly learning, constantly adapting. If they didn't outsmart it, they would be overwhelmed. The enemy's attacks came faster and more aggressively now. But the Cadets were not easily beaten. They had learned to survive on Earth's death world, where the environment was just as much an enemy as anything else. They adapted quickly, using the debris from destroyed ships and asteroids as cover, anticipating the simulation's next move before it could execute it. "Keep moving," Ilara ordered, as she guided the Cadets through the chaos. "We need to disrupt their systems before it's too late." "Eren, how's it going?" "I've got access to the deeper code." Eren's voice came through the comms. "I'm shutting down the simulation's adaptive layer. It's going to take a minute, but I think we can do it." Just as hope began to flicker in the Cadets' hearts, another shockwave of enemy ships appeared on the horizon. This time, there were more than before, twice as many. It was as if the system had recognized their tactics and was now preparing for an all-out assault. The Cadets knew they had to hold out just a little longer. Ilara didn't hesitate. She moved quickly, issuing commands to her team. Take out their command ships first. We're not going to outlast this unless we disable their coordination." The Cadets responded immediately, their ships swooping in like a deadly swarm. The simulation was pushing them to their limits, but the Cadets had been trained for worse. Every movement was calculated, every decision made in the heat of the moment. They were on the edge of defeat, but they would not give in. As the enemy fleet's command ships began to break apart under the relentless onslaught of the Cadets, Erin's voice came through the comms. "It's working. The adaptive layer is shutting down. The simulation is losing its ability to evolve. We can finish this." The Cadets pushed harder, faster, their will to survive greater than the enemy's ability to adapt. With one final, coordinated strike, they'd brought down the last of the enemy's command ships. The simulation, now exposed and vulnerable, began to collapse. But just as the Cadets thought they had won, a voice echoed through their comms, a voice they hadn't expected. "Well done, Cadets," the voice said, "but you've only just begun." The simulation wasn't over. It had merely entered its final phase, and the real battle was still ahead. The Cadets froze, their hands gripping the controls tightly, their breath held in anticipation. That voice, cold, calculated, and eerily calm, sent chills down their spines. The victory they had fought for, the one they thought would bring an end to the endless conflict, now seemed like a mere prelude to something much darker. The voice echoed in their comms once more. "Well done, Cadets. You've managed to defeat my initial assault. But this is just the beginning. Welcome to the final phase of your test." Ilara's heart pounded in her chest. What was this? A new challenge, or had they been caught in a web they couldn't escape? "I knew it was too easy," she muttered under her breath, glaring at the empty battlefield around her. The simulation had changed again. What was once a highly coordinated battle of wits had now become something more dangerous, something unpredictable. She quickly gathered her team's attention. "Stay sharp. This is the final phase, and that means we can't afford to make a single mistake. Trust your instincts and work together." The Cadets nodded, their faces grim but determined. They had already overcome the odds once. They would do it again. But as they prepared for whatever came next, the battlefield began to warp around them. The stars seemed to stretch and bend, the void of space folding into strange, shifting patterns. Something was distorting reality itself. "This isn't a simulation anymore," Erin said, his voice tinged with disbelief. This is something else." Suddenly, the stars blinked out of existence, leaving only blackness. Then, a flash of blinding light. As their vision adjusted, the Cadets found themselves facing a massive ancient structure, a space station unlike anything they had seen before. It floated in the void, enormous and imposing, its surface covered in strange markings and symbols that seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy. "This is the heart of the simulation," Ilara said softly, her voice barely audible. "The source of everything we've faced." The comms crackled, and the voice from before spoke once again. "You've reached the center. Welcome to the true test, Cadets. This station is where your training will truly begin. If you can conquer it, you will have proven yourselves worthy. But beware, it will not be easy. Only the strongest will survive." Before anyone could respond, the structure's surface began to ripple, and from within emerged an array of enemy ships, more advanced and terrifying than anything the Cadets had encountered. Their sheer size and firepower were beyond comprehension. These were no longer simulations. These were real threats. Ilara's mind raced. "We need to take that station down. It's controlling everything. We can't beat these ships without disrupting its power." The Cadets moved into position, their ships darting toward the massive space station. The enemy ships immediately formed up, blocking their way. The Cadets had no choice but to fight their way through. "Erin, can you pinpoint the station's weak points?" Ilara asked, her fingers dancing across the controls. "I'm trying," Erin shouted back. "It's shielded, but I'm getting a faint signal." There's a core in the center of the station. If we hit that, we might be able to disrupt everything." Without wasting a second, Ilara gave the order. "All cadets, target the core. We break this station. We break their control." The cadets dove into the fray, their ships engaging the enemy in a fierce battle. The enemy ships were relentless, their firepower immense, but the cadets were faster, their movements a blur of calculated precision. It wasn't just their training that had gotten them this far. It was their will to win, their refusal to back down. But as they closed in on the station's core, a new challenge arose. The station's shields began to regenerate faster than they could break through. It was as if the very structure of the station was alive, adapting and countering their attacks with terrifying efficiency. "Ilara, we need a plan B," Erin shouted over the comms. "These shields are adapting too fast. We can't just brute force our way through." Ilara's eyes darted over the battlefield, taking in every detail. Her mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, calculations, and strategies. Then it hit her, something subtle, something they had overlooked in their rush to engage. The station's shields weren't just regenerating. They were drawing power from the surrounding area, pulling energy from the enemy ships themselves. "Wait," Ilara shouted. "That's it. The enemy ships. They're powering the shields. We take them out, and the shields go down." With no time to waste, she gave the order. "Focus fire on the enemy ships. Take them out, one by one." The cadets immediately changed tactics, shifting their focus to the enemy vessels. They engaged in a furious battle, their weapons blazing as they tore through the massive ships. It was a dangerous game. They had to destroy the ships without overextending themselves. Erin, working furiously behind the scenes, quickly identified the weakest points on each ship. "Hit them here," he called out, directing the cadets to strike where it would do the most damage. As the enemy ships fell, the shields of the space station began to flicker, their strength weakening. The cadets pressed their advantage, coordinating their strikes to finish the job. One by one, the enemy ships fell. The shields flickered and weakened until they collapsed entirely. The station, now vulnerable, was finally exposed. "This is it," Ilara shouted. "Full power to the core. Hit it with everything we've got." The cadets launched a final, coordinated strike, their missiles streaking toward the station's core. As the missiles made contact, a massive explosion rocked the station, sending shockwaves through the battlefield. The simulation began to crumble. The enemy ships vanished. The artificial stars flickered and went dark. But just as the cadets prepared to celebrate their victory, the voice returned, colder than ever. "You've won the battle, cadets, but the war is far from over." The voice echoed one last time before fading into nothingness, leaving the cadets staring at the wreckage of the space station, knowing that their fight was just beginning. The cadets stood in the silence that followed the explosion, their minds racing as they tried to comprehend what had just occurred. The massive space station was now nothing more than a heap of debris floating in the vast emptiness of space. They had done it. They had broken through what had seemed like an insurmountable challenge. Yet there was no sense of victory, only an uneasy feeling that something far worse awaited them. "Ilara." Erin's voice trembled slightly over the comms. "What just happened? Was that the end?" Ilara didn't respond immediately. She was too focused, too aware of the deeper sense of dread that had settled over her. The voice, the entity that had controlled the simulation, had promised a war was still to come, and she had a sinking feeling that it was no empty threat. She looked out the viewport, her eyes scanning the debris of the destroyed station. But something was off. The stars above them seemed to flicker, their positions subtly shifting, as though reality itself were starting to distort. She finally spoke, her voice steady but filled with caution. "I don't think this is over. It's not just a test anymore. We've crossed into something we don't understand." Just then, the comms crackled again, and the same cold, calculating voice returned, breaking the silence like a sharp knife. You've completed the first phase, cadets, but now the true trial begins. Before anyone could respond, a massive rift tore open in the fabric of space right in front of them. The rift expanded, revealing a fleet of colossal ships emerging from the tear. These ships were unlike anything they had ever seen before. Their designs were far more advanced than the enemies they had fought so far, their sheer size overwhelming. These ships weren't here to test the cadets. They were here to destroy them. Ilara's breath caught in her throat. There was no way this could be real. No simulation could generate a threat of this magnitude. This was something else entirely. "Erin, what are we looking at?" she asked, her voice calm but urgent. Erin's fingers flew over the controls, scanning the incoming fleet. "I don't know. This isn't any known faction. These ships err." But his words were interrupted by the sound of a massive explosion. One of the cadet ships, caught off guard, had been destroyed in an instant. The remaining cadets froze, horror flashing across their faces as they realized the magnitude of the threat they now faced. "Ilara, we need to retreat," Erin shouted, panic creeping into his voice. "There's no way we can win this fight." But Ilara shook her head, her eyes narrowing with fierce determination. "We don't retreat. Not now. We've been through worse, and we've always found a way to fight back." She could feel the weight of her team's eyes on her, their faith in her unwavering. The same faith that had carried them through the previous battles. They weren't just cadets anymore. They were warriors, and it was time to prove it. "Ilara, this is insane," Kai, the youngest of the group, said, his voice trembling. "We're outnumbered, outgunned. How do we even fight these things?" Ilara took a deep breath, her mind working at full speed. "We fight smart. We don't have the numbers or the firepower to take them head-on, but we can use their overconfidence against them." Her voice rang with the certainty that only experience and sheer willpower could provide. The cadets trusted her completely. Ilara knew that their best chance lay in exploiting the enemy's arrogance. These massive, powerful ships likely thought they had already won. They underestimated the humans before them. "We need to disable their flagship," Ilara continued, pointing to the massive vessel at the heart of the enemy fleet. "If we can break their command structure, the rest of the fleet will fall apart." "But how?" Kai asked, his tone a mix of doubt and desperation. Ilara smiled grimly, her mind already formulating a plan. "We don't need brute force. We need precision. Erin, can you hack their systems? Disrupt their communications?" Erin didn't hesitate. "I can try, but it's going to be risky. If they detect us, we're finished." "We don't have a choice," Ilara said firmly. "Kai, you're with me. We'll distract the fleet. Erin, when we give you the signal, you cut the power to their flagship." The cadets quickly fell into formation, each of them preparing for the challenge ahead. The enemy fleet moved with terrifying coordination, but the cadets had something the enemy didn't: determination and ingenuity.